The small town rested quietly under the fading light of evening. It was one of those places where everyone knew everyone, where gossip spread faster than the wind and dreams often got lost between routine and rules. Among the people living there was a quiet girl named Lena. She wasn't the type who stood out in crowds or spoke much at school. Most of the time she kept to herself, carrying a small notebook where she wrote random thoughts, sketches of places, and sometimes bits of lyrics she didn't fully understand yet. Every afternoon, after finishing her chores, she would walk past the community hall on her way home. The hall was old but proud, built of pale wood and lined with tall glass windows that glowed warmly when the sun hit them. Inside that hall stood a piano, an elegant, slightly worn instrument that carried stories in its polished surface. It had been there for decades, used by students who could afford lessons and by performers during town events. Lena always slowed down as she passed by, peeking through the window to catch a glimpse of it. Something about the piano fascinated her. The contrast between the black and white keys, the way the sound seemed to dance in the air whenever someone played. She had never touched a piano before. Her family couldn't afford music lessons or instruments. Her father worked at a small repair shop, and her mother sold homemade food to earn a bit extra. But whenever Lena heard that piano, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't about wanting to perform or to be famous, it was something deeper, a pull she couldn't explain. She imagined herself sitting there, her fingers finding the right notes as if they had known them forever. One day after school, Lena stopped by the hall again. The door was slightly open, and inside, a few music students were practicing. She stood at the back trying to stay unnoticed. A tall student played a classical tune, and others clapped when he finished. The teacher gave instructions and the group laughed together. When the session ended, the students left the piano uncovered. The teacher stepped out to take a call, and for a moment the hall was silent. Lena hesitated at the doorway, her heart beating fast. She knew she shouldn't go in, but something stronger than fear pushed her forward. The piano looked even more beautiful up close. The keys gleamed softly, and the faint smell of polish mixed with the air of dust and wood. She slowly lifted her hand and pressed one key. The sound that came out was simple but clear. It echoed softly around the room. Her lips parted in wonder. She pressed another key and then another. The tones followed each other like tiny steps on a quiet road. Just then laughter burst behind her. Startled, Lena turned around. The same group of students had come back. They looked at her with surprise, then amusement. One of them crossed his arms and said, "What do you think you're doing? This isn't a toy." Another laughed and added, "You can't just walk in and touch it. Do you even know how to play?" Their voices were loud enough to make her hands tremble. "I'm sorry," Lena said softly, stepping back. Her cheeks burned and she wished she could disappear. But they didn't stop. "People spend years learning this," one said mockingly. "You can't just touch it like it's some street game." The teacher came in at that moment, and though he didn't scold her harshly, his expression was clear. She didn't belong there. Lena walked out quickly, holding her bag tight against her chest. The laughter followed her out the door, echoing in her ears even after she reached home. That night she sat in her small room, staring at her notebook. Her mother noticed her silence and asked what was wrong, but Lena only shook her head. How could she explain that something so small, just a few seconds at the piano, had made her feel both alive and humiliated at the same time? Days passed, but she couldn't forget that sound, the soft echo of those few notes. It haunted her in the best and worst ways. Then, while cleaning the attic one weekend, she found something wrapped in an old sheet. It was an old keyboard, dusty and missing a few keys. Her mother said it had belonged to her uncle, who used to play music long before Lena was born. The instrument no longer worked properly, but some keys still made sound when pressed. For most people, it would have been useless. For Lena, it felt like a treasure. She cleaned it carefully, fixed what she could, and placed it near the window in her room. That night, she began to experiment with it. The sounds were uneven, but she didn't mind. She played by ear, trying to repeat small melodies she remembered from the hall or songs she heard on the radio. She made mistakes, laughed quietly at herself, then tried again. Her father sometimes passed by her room and smiled faintly. He didn't understand much about music, but he liked seeing his daughter happy. Her mother would call her for dinner, and Lena would come down late, still humming the tune she was working on. Over time, her fingers became quicker, more confident. She started to understand the rhythm, not through notes on paper but by feeling the emotion behind every sound. Weeks turned into months. She didn't talk about her practice to anyone, not even her friends at school. Music became her little secret, her escape. When she played, she forgot about the people who had laughed at her. She forgot about the teacher's disapproving eyes. It was just her and the notes. Sometimes she'd imagine performing on a real piano again, not to prove anyone wrong, but just to share what she felt one evening. While she was practicing near the open window, a neighbor walking by stopped. He was an older man, quiet and usually kept to himself. Unknown to her, he had once been a music teacher before retiring. He paused because the melody he heard was imperfect yet full of emotion. Something raw and honest that reminded him why he'd loved music in the first place. He didn't say anything that day, but he began listening from his porch every evening as Lena practiced. Meanwhile, at school, the group of students who had mocked her were preparing for an upcoming town event. Their performance would be one of the highlights at the annual community fair. The same piano in the hall would be used. Sometimes Lena passed by their rehearsals on her way home. She heard them practicing complicated pieces, their laughter echoing across the hall. She didn't hate them. In fact, she admired how effortlessly they played. But a part of her quietly promised herself that one day she would sit at that piano again, without fear, without shame. One afternoon, she arrived home to find her neighbor waiting outside her house. He introduced himself politely and mentioned that he had often heard her playing through the window. Lena immediately felt embarrassed, afraid he might tell her to stop. But instead he smiled kindly and said, "You play with feeling. That's something you can't teach." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. He continued, "If you'd like, I can show you a few things." "Not lessons, just guidance." Lena hesitated, but curiosity and gratitude soon took over. She agreed. From that day on, the old man visited her a few times a week. He didn't bring sheet music or complex exercises. Instead, he taught her to listen, to find stories within the sounds, to understand pauses, and to let her emotions guide her fingers. Sometimes they talked about life more than they practiced. He told her about the years he spent teaching students who played perfectly but never felt anything. "Music is like speaking without words," he told her one evening. "If you speak with your heart, people will listen, even if you make mistakes." His words stayed with her. Lena's confidence began to grow again. She no longer feared the piano or the memory of those who mocked her. She knew she had a long way to go, but every small improvement felt like a victory. She dreamed of one day performing, not for praise, but to express everything she couldn't say aloud. Sometimes she still walked past the community hall. The piano inside looked the same, but now when she saw it, she didn't feel fear. She felt a quiet determination. What she didn't know was that an opportunity was coming soon, one that would test everything she had learned and change how everyone saw her forever. Days passed quietly, and Lena continued practicing on her old keyboard. It had missing keys, cracked edges, and uneven sounds, but to her, it was the most precious thing in her world. Every note she played came from the heart. Sometimes she imagined herself in a large hall filled with people, her fingers gliding smoothly over the keys of a real piano. Other times she closed her eyes and simply let the music carry her somewhere peaceful, far away from the small-town noise and the memories of laughter that once stung her ears. The retired man who had offered to guide her, whom she now called simply Sir, often came by to listen. He never treated her like a student or corrected her too much. Instead, he would sit quietly, his hands folded on his lap, and wait until she finished. Then he would say things like, "That song, you played it with sadness today, why?" She would smile shyly and answer, "I don't know, maybe I was thinking too much." He would chuckle softly and reply, "Good. Music should reflect what's inside you. Never play the same tune twice in the same way." Under his gentle guidance, Lena started to understand that music wasn't only about hitting the right notes. It was about emotion, about honesty. He taught her that even silence between notes carried meaning. Sometimes he would tell her stories from his own life, about concerts he played when he was young, about students who gave up too soon, and about one girl who reminded him of her, who had also started with nothing but determination. Lena listened closely to every word. Each story he shared made her believe that maybe she could do something with this gift she had discovered. But deep down, she still doubted herself. The memory of that day at the hall when everyone laughed at her still followed her like a shadow. No matter how much progress she made, a part of her was afraid that others would always see her as that foolish girl who didn't belong near a piano. One cold evening, as the wind howled outside and the lights flickered, Lena sat beside her keyboard and stared at her reflection in the window. "Maybe this is all I'll ever be," she whispered to herself. Just then, her mother knocked softly and entered the room with a cup of tea. "You've been playing for hours," she said kindly. "Take a break." Lena smiled faintly. "I'm trying to get better." Her mother placed the cup on the table and said, "You already are, sweetheart. You don't need to prove anything." But Lena didn't want to stop. She felt that if she paused, her courage might slip away again. So after her mother left, she went back to playing. The notes filled the small room like gentle waves, each one rising and falling with her heartbeat. A few days later, while she was helping her mother at the market, she overheard some people talking near the stall. "They're having a talent show next month," one woman said. "The community is inviting everyone to join. The piano students are performing too." Lena's heart skipped a beat. A talent show. The same hall. The same piano. She stood frozen for a moment, then quickly pretended to rearrange the basket so no one would notice her expression. That night she couldn't sleep. The thought kept echoing in her mind. Maybe this was her chance, not to prove anyone wrong, but to face her fear. The next day she told her neighbor about it. He looked thoughtful for a moment and then smiled gently. "You should go for it," he said. "You've worked hard. It's time to share it." "But they'll laugh again," she said softly. "Let them," he replied. "You're not the same girl they laughed at. And if they can't see that, it's their loss, not yours." Lena stayed quiet. She wanted to believe him. But the thought of standing in front of a crowd made her stomach twist. Yet something inside her whispered, "Try." So she did. She went to the community center the next morning and wrote her name on the registration list. The organizer looked surprised when he saw her. "Are you sure?" he asked kindly. "The piano section is usually for trained students." She nodded firmly. "I'll do my best." When her name appeared on the list, whispers began to spread around town. Some people were curious. Others were skeptical. "That girl? The one who touched the piano last year? She's brave, I'll give her that." "Or foolish," someone added. At school she could feel people's eyes on her. Some smiled politely, others whispered behind her back. The same group of students from before laughed when they saw her name on the board. One of them said loudly, "Oh, this will be fun to watch." Lena ignored them. She kept her focus on practice. Every day after school, she rushed home, played until her fingers ached, and then rested before doing her homework. Her neighbor continued to visit, helping her polish her performance. He didn't choose a famous song for her. Instead, he helped her compose her own short piece, a simple melody that reflected her journey, filled with both pain and hope. They worked on the balance between soft and strong notes, how to hold her breath during certain parts, how to end in silence so the emotion lingered. "People won't remember your name," he told her one afternoon. "They'll remember how you made them feel." The day of the show drew closer. The whole town buzzed with excitement. Posters were put up everywhere and rehearsals filled the hall daily. Lena didn't join the group sessions. She preferred practicing alone at home. On the last evening before the event, her neighbor brought her a small box. Inside was a delicate silver pin shaped like a tiny note. "This was my first music award," he said with a smile. "I want you to wear it when you perform." Lena looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I can't take this," she said softly. "You're not taking it," he said. "You're continuing its story." She thanked him quietly and promised to do her best. The next morning came faster than she expected. The town square was filled with stalls, lights, and laughter. Inside the hall, people filled the seats. Families, students, teachers, and curious onlookers. The piano gleamed under the stage lights. Lena stood backstage, her hands cold and her heart beating fast. She could hear the audience clapping for each performer. One by one, the acts finished. The same students who once mocked her performed a complicated classical piece. Their fingers moved quickly and the audience cheered loudly. Lena watched from behind the curtain, admiring their skill but reminding herself that her music wasn't a competition. It was her voice, finally, her name was called. Next, we have Lena performing her original piano piece. The room quieted. She walked onto the stage, her steps small but steady. The murmurs started immediately, some surprised, some doubtful. She sat down on the same piano she had once touched in fear. Her reflection shimmered faintly on its polished surface. She placed her hands on the keys, but before playing, she looked up for a moment. In the front row, she saw her parents smiling nervously, and her neighbor nodding encouragingly. The sight gave her strength. She closed her eyes and began to play. The first few notes were soft and slow, like the sound of distant rain. Her fingers trembled slightly, but as the melody grew, so did her confidence. The music told her story, the loneliness, the laughter she endured, the nights she spent practicing quietly, and the hope that kept her going. The hall was completely silent. Every person listened as the simple melody filled the air with warmth. Halfway through, Lena added a small pause, letting the silence stretch. Then she played the final part strong and clear, like sunlight breaking through clouds. When she hit the last note, she let it ring until it faded naturally. She didn't open her eyes right away. She took a deep breath, expecting polite applause or maybe a few claps. But what followed was something she didn't expect at all. The entire hall erupted in applause. People stood up cheering, clapping, some even whistling. The same students who had laughed at her were frozen, their expressions stunned. The teacher who once doubted her smiled with pride. Her parents had tears in their eyes, and her neighbor simply nodded, his eyes shining. For a long moment, Lena couldn't move. The applause washed over her like a wave. Then she stood and bowed softly. That day, she didn't just perform a song, she changed how everyone saw her, and more importantly, how she saw herself. The crowd's applause echoed in Lena's ears long after the performance ended. She stood frozen for a few seconds, unable to believe what had just happened. The same people who once doubted her were now cheering for her. It felt unreal, almost like a dream. When she finally stepped off the stage, her hands were still trembling. But this time it wasn't from fear, it was from joy. Her parents hugged her tightly as soon as she reached them. Her mother's eyes were wet with tears, and her father kept saying, "I'm proud of you, so proud." The retired neighbor who had guided her smiled quietly. "I told you they would listen," he said gently. "You spoke through your heart." Lena didn't know what to say. She simply nodded, her eyes shining. For the first time, she felt free from the memory of that old humiliation. The laughter she once heard in the hall was replaced by applause, and it was as if the heavy weight she'd carried for so long had finally lifted. As she walked home that night, the air felt different. She could still hear distant sounds from the fair, but everything around her seemed quieter, calmer. People who passed her on the street smiled warmly and congratulated her. Some even stopped to tell her how moved they were by her performance. "You played with emotion," one woman said. It felt real. Those simple words meant more to Lena than any prize. When she reached home, she placed the silver pin her neighbor had given her on her desk and stared at it for a long time. She touched it gently, whispering, "Thank you." Then she looked at her old keyboard by the window. It looked small and worn out, but she knew that without it she wouldn't have made it to the stage. The next few days were a blur of kind words and new attention. Teachers at her school praised her. Some of the students who had ignored her before suddenly wanted to talk to her. Even the same group that had mocked her approached her during lunch. One of them smiled awkwardly and said, "You were amazing." "We didn't know you could play like that." Lena smiled back politely. "Thank you," she said. Though deep inside she knew they hadn't changed completely. Still, she wasn't bitter. She had learned that success wasn't about revenge. It was about proving to yourself that you can rise above what others think. Her neighbor came over a few evenings later. They sat outside on the porch, sipping tea as the sun began to set. "So," he said, "what will you do next?" Lena looked at him thoughtfully. "I don't know. I just wanted to play once, to show that I could." He nodded slowly. "You've done that. But music doesn't end with one performance. If it's in your heart, it stays there. You have to keep feeding it." She thought about that for a while. Maybe he was right. Maybe this wasn't the end of her story, but the beginning of something new. Soon, people from nearby towns heard about her performance. A local newspaper wrote a short article about the self-taught girl who stunned the audience. It was a small piece tucked near the middle pages, but it made Lena's parents beam with pride. When the neighbor showed her the newspaper, she blushed. "I didn't do anything special," she said quietly. He smiled. That's exactly what makes it special. After that, the community hall's teacher invited her to come and practice whenever she wanted. At first, she couldn't believe it. The same teacher who once told her she didn't belong there was now offering her free access to the piano. You have a natural gift, he said sincerely. You should keep developing it. Lena thanked him and started visiting the hall regularly. Each time she sat at that piano, memories came flooding back, both the pain and the pride. But now, instead of feeling nervous, she felt calm. She played with quiet confidence, letting the notes fill the empty room. One afternoon, while she was practicing, a few children peeked through the door. They looked curious, their eyes wide. Instead of shooing them away, Lena smiled and waved them in. Would you like to listen? She asked. They nodded eagerly and sat on the floor near the piano. She played a cheerful tune for them, one she had recently composed. The children clapped and laughed at the lively rhythm. When she finished, one of them said, I wish I could play like you. You can, she said kindly. You just need to start. After that day, more children began to drop by when she practiced. They called her Miss Piano and loved watching her fingers move across the keys. Some even brought their small notebooks to take notes or draw pictures of her while she played. Lena enjoyed their company. It reminded her of how much she had once longed for a chance, and now she could give that feeling of inspiration to others. Her neighbor often stopped by to watch, smiling proudly from a corner seat. You're not just learning anymore, he said one day. You're teaching without realizing it. Weeks passed and her life began to change quietly but steadily. She was invited to perform at small community events, birthdays, and even school gatherings. She never charged money for it. She played because she loved to share her music. Sometimes when she sat on stage, she would spot faces in the audience who once doubted her. And every time she saw them smiling and clapping, she felt no anger, only peace. But deep down, Lena wanted to grow even more. She began saving money from her part-time job at a local store. Her goal was to buy a new keyboard, one that worked properly and had all the keys. Her parents noticed her determination and decided to help her. Together, they managed to buy a simple but decent keyboard. The day it arrived, Lena was speechless. She touched the smooth surface, her eyes filling with tears. Thank you, she whispered. That night, she played for hours, exploring every sound the instrument could make. It felt like opening a new chapter in her life. Her neighbor, who had been her biggest supporter, sat quietly by the window, listening. You've come a long way, he said softly. Lena smiled. Because you believed in me. He shook his head. No, because you believed in yourself. I just reminded you of it. Months went by and her music began to spread beyond the small town. Videos of her performances, shared by others, reached nearby cities. A music teacher from another district contacted her parents and offered her a chance to attend weekend classes for advanced training, completely free. It was more than she had ever dreamed of. When she told her neighbor about the offer, he was overjoyed. You see, he said, when you follow your heart, doors open where you least expect them. Before leaving for her first class, Lena visited the hall one last time. She placed her hand gently on the old piano and smiled. It wasn't just an instrument anymore, it was a memory, a witness to her struggle and growth. She whispered, Thank you for letting me start again. At the new music center, everything felt strange at first. The students there were skilled, confident, and trained. But unlike before, she didn't feel small. She had already learned something no book could teach, the power of emotion and persistence. The teacher there was impressed by her natural understanding of tone and rhythm. You have something rare, he said. Technique can be taught, but feeling cannot. Slowly, she became part of the group. The other students admired her story once they heard it. Some even asked her to help them understand how she played so emotionally. Lena realized that her past pain had turned into her strength. Back home, her neighbor continued to follow her journey. Every time she returned after class, she would visit him first and share everything she had learned. He listened patiently, his eyes full of pride. One day, he told her, You'll play on a stage far beyond this town. And when that happens, remember where you began. She nodded, smiling warmly. I'll never forget. That night, as she sat by her window looking out at the quiet streets of her little town, she felt something deep inside, a mix of gratitude and hope. The laughter that once hurt her had turned into a lesson. The pain had shaped her, the music had healed her, and the kindness of one person had changed everything. She pressed a key on her new keyboard, and the soft sound filled the air. She closed her eyes and began to play once more, not for an audience, not for applause, but for the simple joy of being alive and following her heart. Months turned into a year, and Lena's life began to bloom in ways she had never imagined. The music school she attended on weekends became her second home. The teachers there saw something special in her, not because she was the most skilled, but because she played with heart. While others focused on perfection, she focused on feeling. Every time she touched the piano, it was like she was telling a story without words. Her classmates respected her, and some even began to ask her for help. They noticed that her melodies carried a kind of warmth that could calm anyone listening. One of her instructors once told her, "You remind me why I became a teacher. You play as if the music is part of you." Those words stayed with her for days. Whenever she returned to her small town, the people treated her differently now. The same community that once laughed at her now invited her to perform at small gatherings. Children waited eagerly for her music, and adults often said her songs brought peace to their hearts. She became someone people looked up to, proof that passion and persistence could break any barrier. But despite all the praise, Lena never lost her simplicity. She still practiced on the same old keyboard she had started with, the one missing a few keys. It reminded her where she came from. Sometimes, when the night was quiet and the stars filled the sky, she'd look out her window and remember the first time she touched the piano in the hall, the fear, the laughter, the shame. And she'd smile. It felt like a different lifetime. Her neighbor, the retired pianist who had guided her, still visited her every weekend. Their bond had grown deeper over time. They didn't always talk about music. Sometimes they just sat in silence, sipping tea and watching the sunset. But even in silence, they understood each other perfectly. One evening, he handed her a small envelope. "Open it," he said softly. Inside, there was a letter from a nearby cultural center. It was an invitation for Lena to perform at a regional music event, a gathering of young artists from different towns. Her name had been recommended by her teacher at the music school. She read the letter twice, barely believing it. "They want me to perform?" she asked, her voice trembling. Her neighbor nodded, his eyes twinkling. "Yes, it's your next step. This time you won't just play for this town, you'll play for the world outside it." Lena felt her heart race. It was exciting, but it also scared her. "What if I'm not ready?" she whispered. "You're never truly ready," he said gently, "but that's what makes every performance beautiful. It's a leap of faith." The next few weeks were filled with preparation. She spent hours choosing the right piece to play. She wanted something that represented her journey, something honest, not fancy. She finally decided to play a melody she had composed herself, one that mixed soft beginnings with powerful crescendos. Much like her own story, her teacher at the music school helped her polish it, guiding her on transitions and timing. But even as she practiced, fear occasionally crept in. The thought of playing in front of strangers made her nervous. Unlike her town, these people wouldn't know her story. They would only hear her music. Would it be enough? The night before the event, Lena couldn't sleep. She sat by her keyboard, her fingers resting on the keys but not pressing them. The room was quiet except for the faint sound of crickets outside. She thought about her journey, how it all started with curiosity, then pain, then courage. She thought of her parents' sacrifices, her neighbor's patience, and all the times she almost gave up. She whispered softly, "Tomorrow I'll play for all of them." The next morning was bright and cool. Her parents accompanied her to the cultural center, along with her neighbor who carried his small camera to record her performance. The hall was much larger than the one in her town, with rows of elegant seats and lights shining down from the high ceiling. Dozens of performers were backstage, warming up or checking their instruments. Lena felt a familiar nervousness rise in her chest. She stood quietly, holding her hands together, trying to calm her breathing. Her teacher from the music school noticed and came over. "Nervous?" he asked kindly. She nodded. "That's good," he said. "It means you care." When it was finally her turn, she stepped onto the stage. The light from above felt warm on her face. She could barely see the audience, but she could feel their presence, a sea of quiet expectation. She sat down at the piano and took a deep breath. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. Then she began. The first few notes were soft, like whispers. Slowly, the melody grew, weaving emotion into every sound. The hall fell silent. Each rise and fall of the music told her story, of pain, hope, and the courage to try again. Her fingers moved smoothly, but it wasn't about technique. It was about connection. For a few minutes, the world disappeared, and only the music remained. When she played the final note, she let it linger in the air before lowering her hands. There was a pause, a breathless silence, and then the room erupted in applause. The sound washed over her like a wave. She stood, bowed gently, and smiled through tears. Her parents clapped proudly from the front row. Her neighbor recorded every second, his eyes glistening. The judges nodded in appreciation. One of them even stood up to shake her hand afterward, saying, "You have a rare gift. Don't ever stop." After the performance, several students came to talk to her. Some asked how she learned to play so emotionally without formal training. Lena smiled and said, "Because I learned from my heart before I learned from books." They laughed softly, but they understood. That evening, as she and her family returned home, her neighbor placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it again," he said. Lena looked at him curiously. "Did what?" "You made them feel something real. That's what true music is about." In the following weeks, messages began to arrive from people who had attended the event. Some wanted to collaborate, some wanted lessons, and others simply wanted to thank her for inspiring them. Lena was overwhelmed but grateful. She realized that music had given her more than applause. It had given her a purpose. She began spending more time teaching children from her town. She didn't charge them money, knowing many couldn't afford lessons. They gathered in the community hall every weekend, sitting around the same piano that had once been forbidden to her. The teacher from the hall gladly supported her, even providing small stools for the children. Watching the young faces light up as they learned their first tunes filled Lena with joy. She saw herself in them, the same curiosity, the same spark of wonder. If they can feel the same love for music that I did, she thought, then my journey was worth it. One afternoon, her neighbor came to visit as the children were practicing. He sat quietly at the back, smiling as the room filled with cheerful sounds. After the class ended and the children ran out laughing, he approached her. "I never thought I'd see this hall come alive like this again," he said softly. She smiled. "It's not my doing. The piano always wanted to be heard," he chuckled. "You gave it a voice again." That night, Lena found herself sitting by her window, the silver pin still gleaming on her desk. The air outside was cool and the sky was full of stars. She thought about how far she had come, from a shy girl afraid to touch a piano to someone helping others find their own melodies. But deep inside, she also felt something else, a quiet sadness. Her neighbor, her first teacher and supporter, had grown weaker over the past few weeks. He didn't say much about it, but she could see it in his slow movements and tired eyes. A few days later, she visited him with a small bouquet of flowers. He was resting on his porch, wrapped in a warm blanket. "You shouldn't have brought those," he said with a faint smile. "I wanted to," she replied softly. "You've given me so much. These are nothing in return." He looked at her for a long moment and then said, "Promise me something." "Anything," she said. "Keep playing," he whispered. "No matter what happens, because your music doesn't just belong to you anymore, it belongs to everyone who hears it." She nodded, fighting back tears. "I promise." That night she played a special tune outside his window, one she had written for him. It was slow, filled with warmth and gratitude. The melody drifted through the air like a soft goodbye. When the last note faded, she sat silently, her heart full. She knew that her journey wasn't over. It was only changing shape, growing from her own dream into something much larger. Days passed and Lena's small town began to change in quiet but beautiful ways. Music had become a part of its soul again. Every weekend, children gathered in the hall, their laughter filling the air. The once dusty piano now shone under soft lights, touched by dozens of eager hands learning their first songs. Lena would sit beside them, guiding each note patiently, smiling when they stumbled and clapped when they got it right. Her neighbor, though too weak to attend now, always asked about the lessons. She visited him regularly, sharing stories of the children's progress. Sometimes she'd record small clips of their playing and show him on her phone. He would listen, close his eyes, and whisper, "That's the sound of hope." But one cold evening, the wind outside felt different, quiet and heavy. When Lena knocked on his door the next morning, there was no answer. A kind neighbor told her that he had passed away peacefully in his sleep. For a moment, Lena just stood there, unable to move. The world around her seemed to blur. Later that night, she sat beside her piano, staring at the keys. Every note she had ever played suddenly felt connected to him. Her fingers trembled as she began to play the melody she had written for him, the same one she played outside his window days earlier. This time the sound was softer, slower, filled with love and sadness. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Thank you for believing in me." In the weeks that followed, she felt his absence deeply. The chair on his porch remained empty, and the street seemed quieter without his gentle voice. But she also knew he wouldn't want her to stop. His words echoed in her mind. Keep playing, so she did. She threw herself into her work with renewed purpose. The children at the hall became her strength. She taught them not just to play but to feel, to tell stories through music. Every performance became a tribute, every smile a reminder of the man who had taught her what true kindness meant. As time went on, Lena's name began to spread beyond her town. A video of her performance from the regional event had quietly gone viral online. Someone had shared it with the caption, "She plays like she's lived every note." Millions watched, drawn to the raw emotion in her music. Offers began to pour in. Interviews, collaborations, invitations to perform at larger events. At first, she hesitated. Fame had never been her goal. But then she remembered what her neighbor had told her. Your music doesn't just belong to you anymore. She accepted an invitation to perform in the city, a grand event that brought together musicians from across the country. The hall was enormous, with golden lights, red curtains, and hundreds of seats filled with eager faces. She stood backstage, dressed simply as always, holding her small silver pin in her hand. It had become her good luck charm, the same one he had given her long ago. When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage calmly. She sat at the piano, closed her eyes for a moment, and breathed deeply. Then she began to play. Her piece was new yet familiar. It was a mix of her memories, the laughter of children, the quiet streets of her town, her parents' gentle support, and her mentor's guiding presence. The music rose and fell like waves, carrying the audience through her story without a single word. By the end, the hall was silent. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then came the applause, loud, heartfelt, endless. People stood, clapping with tears in their eyes. Lena bowed slightly, her heart full. She didn't need trophies or medals. Their faces said everything. After the event, reporters approached her, asking how she created such emotional music. She smiled softly and said, "Because every note is real. I play what I've lived." The story of the girl who was once scorned for touching a piano spread everywhere. Articles were written about her, not for her fame, but for her journey. From a small town where she wasn't allowed to touch an instrument to the grand stage where her music moved hearts across the world. When she returned home, her entire town gathered to welcome her. They decorated the hall with flowers and lights. The same people who once mocked her now stood with pride, calling her their inspiration. The mayor gave a short speech saying, "Lena taught us that dreams are not born in comfort. They are built from courage." Lena smiled humbly, holding back tears. She didn't want recognition for herself. She wanted it for the message her story carried. After the celebration, she quietly walked to the piano and played a short melody, one her neighbor had once taught her. Everyone fell silent. Even the children who usually couldn't stay still stood quietly, their eyes fixed on her hands. When she finished, she looked up and said, "This piano taught me how to speak when I had no words. And it taught me that every person has music inside them. They just need the courage to let it out." Her words stayed with everyone long after that night. In the following months, Lena began working on something close to her heart, a small music foundation for children from poor families. She wanted every child, no matter where they came from, to have a chance to touch a piano without fear. Just as she once wished she could, she worked hard to gather funds, often performing at charity events to raise money. Her parents helped manage things, and her old teacher from the music school offered to guide the curriculum. Finally, after almost a year of effort, the foundation opened. It wasn't big, but it was filled with heart. The walls were painted with colors, and on one of them, a simple quote was written, "Music belongs to everyone." On the opening day, children lined up excitedly, some holding their parents' hands, some just looking curiously at the instruments. Lena stood at the entrance, greeting each one. She could see in their eyes the same spark she had felt years ago. One little girl shyly approached her and asked, "Can I really play?" Lena knelt down, smiled, and said, "Of course you can. You just have to believe you can." The girl nodded, her eyes shining, and ran toward the piano. Watching her sit there, Lena felt her chest tighten. It was like looking into her own past. The memory of that day when she was scolded for touching the piano flashed before her eyes. But now it was different. The piano wasn't forbidden anymore. It was free, open, and full of hope. As the children played their first simple notes, Lena felt something shift inside her. It wasn't sadness or joy, it was peace. Everything had come full circle. Her journey that began with pain had led to healing, not just for her, but for others too. That evening, after everyone left, she sat alone in the quiet hall. The sunlight filtered through the windows, casting golden patterns on the floor. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play softly. It wasn't a performance, just a moment between her and the piano. Her melody floated through the empty room, gentle and warm. In her heart, she could almost hear her neighbor's voice saying, "See what you've done? You kept playing." A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from sorrow. It was gratitude. Years later, Lena's foundation grew into a well-known program that helped hundreds of children discover their musical talents. Some of her students went on to become teachers, composers, or performers. They often came back to thank her, saying that her story had given them courage. Whenever anyone asked about her success, she always said the same thing. It started with a mistake, a wrong touch on a piano that became the right path for my life. In her home, the old keyboard still stood in the corner. She never replaced it. It was missing a few keys, but to her it was perfect, because it held her memories, her beginnings. Sometimes when she had a quiet evening, she would sit beside it, close her eyes, and play a tune that only she and her mentor would recognize. It was their secret song, the one that carried the sound of friendship, courage, and the power of never giving up. And somewhere deep down she knew that as long as she kept playing, his spirit would always be there, listening, smiling, and proud. Her life became a song that never truly ended. Every child who touched the piano carried a piece of her melody forward, spreading kindness, hope, and the belief that even the smallest dream could echo across the world. Because once, there was a girl who was scorned for touching a piano. But the moment she played, she didn't just change people's minds, she changed their hearts. And that music never stopped.